My name is Evelyn, and today I want to share something that changed my life forever. It was my daughter's 40th birthday, a day I had looked forward to for months. I baked her favourite cake, hoping to bring back the warmth we once had. But instead of gratitude, she gave me a harsh, cold command. The best gift you could give me is to disappear from my life. I was stunned. But little did she know that one cruel remark would be the beginning of a journey I never expected, a journey to reclaim my dignity, my life, and my voice. Would you have stayed silent, or would you have fought for what was rightfully yours? Evelyn carefully sliced the birthday cake, each slice a memory. She could almost hear the laughter of her daughter Alison from years ago as the sharp knife cut through the soft cake. The scent of lemon filled the kitchen, wrapping the room in a nostalgic warmth. The table was set with her daughter's favourite flowers, daisies, and the gleam of silverware reflected the soft light from the kitchen window. Everything was perfect, just as Evelyn had imagined it would be. She smiled softly to herself, wishing for the day to bring back the joy of simpler times. But what she didn't know was that one sentence would tear everything apart. The cake sat perfectly on the table, awaiting its moment. The door creaked open, and Evelyn's heart lifted with the hope of seeing Alison's smile. The familiar sound of footsteps came closer, followed by the hushed murmur of Mark, Alison's husband, and the clatter of her grandchildren's laughter. As they entered, Evelyn's face lit up a warm greeting ready to escape her lips. But when Alison walked in, there was no joy in her eyes. She looked around, her gaze cold and distant. The moment that Evelyn had been preparing for imagining was slipping away. "Mum?" Alison's voice cut through the silence, sharp and unyielding. "What is all this?" "I baked your favourite cake," Evelyn said, her smile faltering. "I thought we could have lunch together just like we used to." Alison froze in place, her lips pressed tightly together as the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The tension was palpable. Mark shifted on his feet, but said nothing. The children barely looked up from their phones, oblivious to the growing distance between mother and daughter. Evelyn's heart beat faster, unsure of what was happening. "Honestly, Mom," Alison said, her voice rising, "you don't get it, do you? I don't need cakes or lunches. The best gift you could give me is to disappear from my life." The words landed like a blow. Evelyn's throat tightened, and her world seemed to tilt. She stared at her daughter, her heart aching with disbelief. "I don't understand." She whispered the words caught in her throat. "You never do." Alison snapped, her eyes flashing with impatience. "You're always hovering, always meddling. I'm tired of it." Mark shifted awkwardly, but still said nothing. The children continued their mindless scrolling, oblivious to the pain that cut through Evelyn like a knife. Evelyn stood frozen, the weight of Alison's words settling on her like a cold mist. She watched as her daughter turned on her heel, her footsteps echoing as she walked away from her. The room, which had once been filled with warmth, now felt empty. The cake, untouched, seemed to mock her. Alison didn't look back as she headed out the door, the sound of her departure louder than any words could be. Evelyn stood in silence, the cake still in her hands, a symbol of a love that had been offered but rejected. The joy she had hoped for the simple act of family togetherness was gone. For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to feel the coldness that had slowly been creeping into her life. The words echoed in her mind. "The best gift you could give me is to disappear from my life." The kitchen was silent now, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Evelyn stood there, her hand trembling around the knife, a hollow feeling growing inside her. The warmth of the kitchen no longer reached her. She placed the knife down slowly and let out a shaky breath. Her daughter had said it. And in that moment, Evelyn realized that things had changed. She was no longer part of her daughter's life. The woman who had once given everything to make Alison happy, her time, her energy, her love, was now nothing more than an inconvenience. Evelyn gazed at the untouched cake on the table, her heart heavy. She didn't know what to do, what to say. She was alone again, and yet the silence in the room felt louder than any argument could have. Her eyes lingered on the door, the sound of footsteps fading into the distance. She stood there still, and broken her hands, gripping the edge of the table. Her daughter was gone, but for the first time in years, Evelyn realized that she was still here. She wasn't sure where to go from here, but she knew one thing for certain: this was the beginning of something she couldn't ignore anymore. Evelyn stood there, the cake still in her hands, watching the cold footsteps of her daughter fade away. Evelyn sat silently in her favourite armchair, staring out the window as the light of the afternoon faded. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now seemed distant and foreign. She looked around at the familiar walls and furniture, but something felt off. The more she sat there, the more she noticed how things had changed, how the smallest details had been altered, and how no one seemed to acknowledge it. The little things she had once cherished now seemed to slip away without any explanation. By the time she realized it, she understood the true nature of the loss, not just her daughter's absence, but something far deeper, far more invasive. She stood up slowly, her joints creaking, and walked toward the living room bookshelf. It was a place where she had stored family photos, small trinkets from their travels, and books she had carefully curated over the years. But today, something was missing. Her favourite photo of her and Harold, a picture from their last vacation before his passing, was no longer there. She glanced around, feeling a tightening in her chest. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Evelyn knew. She had placed that photo there herself just last month. Now it was gone. Her gaze shifted to the mantelpiece. The small porcelain vase, a gift from Margaret Langley, her neighbour of over 20 years, was missing too. She hadn't thought much of it at first, assuming it had been moved, or perhaps broken. But something in her gut told her that wasn't the case. Evelyn's mind began to race as she surveyed the room. Other things were different too. Her favourite armchair had been moved to the far corner of the room, the one closest to the window, where she couldn't enjoy the warmth of the sunlight. Her beloved rocking chair, the one Harold had made with his own hands, was no longer in its usual spot near the fireplace. Instead, it was tucked away in the back room, gathering dust. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. It wasn't just the furniture that had changed. The house, her sanctuary, had slowly been altered without her consent. Evelyn walked through the house, each step growing heavier. The walls that had witnessed so much of her life now seemed to close in on her. The sudden ringing of the phone startled her, breaking the eerie silence. She picked it up with a trembling hand. "Evelyn, dear, it's Margaret." The voice on the other end said, warm and familiar. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Margaret Langley had always been a steady presence in Evelyn's life, someone who had seen her through difficult times. She and Harold had been close friends with the Langleys for years, and Margaret had never hesitated to lend a hand when Evelyn needed it. "I was just wondering." Margaret continued, "Have you noticed anything strange around the house lately? I'm not one to meddle, but I couldn't help but overhear something in the neighbourhood about some financial changes, things that don't seem right." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Her mind flashed to the small changes she had noticed over the past few days, things she couldn't quite put her finger on, but they felt wrong. Her hand tightened around the phone as a wave of unease washed over her. "What do you mean?" Evelyn asked, trying to sound calm despite the tightness in her throat. "I've been hearing talk." It seems your daughter and son-in-law have been involved in some dealings, money being moved around, accounts accessed without your knowledge. I'm worried, Evelyn. The world seemed to slow down for a moment. Evelyn's mind was a blur as the pieces began to fall into place. The missing photo, the rearranged furniture, the sudden distance between herself and Alison, it all started to make sense. This wasn't just neglect or carelessness. It was something far worse. Thank you, Margaret, Evelyn said, her voice shaking. I'll look into it. As she hung up the phone, Evelyn's stomach churned. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The changes in her home, the things she had overlooked, were no longer just small inconveniences. They were signs of something deeper, something far more sinister. Evelyn sat down heavily in her chair, her mind racing. She had to act, and she had to act quickly. She could no longer stay silent. There was a deeper betrayal here, and she wasn't about to let it go unnoticed. She stood up again and walked to her desk. It was time to face the truth. Opening her laptop, she quickly checked her bank accounts. Her heart sank as she saw multiple withdrawals, large sums of money that she hadn't authorized. There, in black and white, was the proof. Her own daughter, the one she had raised, had been taking from her. Evelyn closed the laptop slowly, her hands trembling. This was it. She had to do something. She couldn't remain passive any longer. Evelyn found a large sum of money withdrawn from her account, an amount she hadn't known about. She knew then she could no longer stay silent. Evelyn stepped into the lawyer's office, the door closing softly behind her. She didn't speak a word as she walked across the polished floor, her footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Everything about the room, its dark wood furniture, the thick leather chairs, the serious faces of the law books stacked neatly on the shelves, felt heavy. Yet it was the only place that offered any hope. In her heart, Evelyn knew this was the right choice. She would not let them deceive her any longer. She had been silent for too long, and now it was time to fight. Lisa Walker, the lawyer who had agreed to meet her, stood up as Evelyn approached. Lisa was in her late 40s, sharp and confident. She offered Evelyn a warm, professional smile, but Evelyn couldn't bring herself to smile back. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the decision she had made. It had been a long time coming. The betrayal from her own daughter, the manipulation from her son-in-law, it had all built up to this moment. Mrs. Miller, it's good to see you, Lisa said as they sat across from each other. Evelyn nodded her hands, folding neatly in her lap. Thank you for seeing me? Evelyn replied, her voice steady, despite the storm raging inside. I need help. I need to take action. Lisa's expression softened slightly, and she leaned forward, giving Evelyn her full attention. What's going on? Evelyn took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she spoke. I don't know what's happening to me, but I know I've been robbed. My own family has taken from me my money, my dignity. I need to stop it. I can't just sit back and do nothing. Lisa nodded, her eyes sharp as she listened. I understand. The first step is to gather as much evidence as possible. We'll need to make sure we have everything in order before we proceed with any legal action. Evelyn's gaze hardened, her resolve firming. I've already noticed things, small changes, things taken money disappearing from my accounts. I know it's my daughter and son-in-law, and I can't just let it go on anymore. Then we'll start right away, Lisa said. I'll help you collect everything we need. We'll build a strong case. Evelyn's hand reached into her purse, pulling out the folder she had brought with her, filled with bank statements, cancelled checks, and documents she had gathered in secret over the past few weeks. She placed them gently on the desk between them. I want to take back what's mine. Lisa took a moment to scan the documents, nodding thoughtfully. This is a good start, Evelyn. You've already taken the first steps. Let's get the rest of the evidence we need, and then we can proceed with filing. The weight on Evelyn's chest seemed to lift just slightly. She felt like she was no longer drowning in her own silence. She had taken action, she had made a decision. The next step would be to reclaim what had been stolen from her, not just physically, but her right to respect, to be seen, to be heard. As Evelyn signed the contract with Lisa, she couldn't help but feel a small spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the first tangible step toward regaining control over her life, something she thought had been lost forever. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly, the weight of the decision heavy in her voice. "I know I've waited too long, but I'm not waiting anymore." When Evelyn returned home, she overheard a phone call between Alison and Mark, discussing plans to take control of her assets. It was the final confirmation of what she feared, but it also made her resolve stronger. She couldn't step back now. The phone rang unexpectedly, its sharp tone breaking the quiet of Evelyn's home. She picked up the receiver, her hand trembling slightly. "Evelyn, it's Margaret," said the voice, warm yet urgent. "I have something you need to hear, something you might not know." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "Margaret, what's going on? I think you need to come over." Margaret continued, her voice dropping low. "There's something I've overheard about Alison and Mark." The unease in Margaret's tone was unmistakable. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "I'll be right there." When Evelyn arrived at Margaret's home, she could tell something serious was unfolding. Margaret led her inside, speaking in a tone Evelyn had never heard before. "Evelyn, I've overheard things you need to know. Your daughter and Mark, they're planning something behind your back." Evelyn felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Margaret took a deep breath. "I've heard them talking about how they're going to take control of your assets, how they've been moving money around, even using your accounts." Evelyn's chest tightened. She had sensed something wrong, but hearing Margaret confirm it made her feel like the ground had been ripped from under her. Her own daughter conspiring against her. Margaret paused, then pulled out an old, worn notebook. "I found this among my things. It's full of details about your finances, transactions, withdrawals, things you didn't know." Evelyn's hands shook as she took the notebook. Flipping it open, she saw the lists of transactions, dates, and amounts. The evidence was irrefutable. Margaret leaned in. "You need to act quickly, Evelyn. They're counting on you not noticing. But now you know." Evelyn nodded, her heart racing. This wasn't just about her house or the money. It was about the trust that had been broken, the family that had turned on her. Back at home, Evelyn read through the journal with growing disbelief. As she neared the end, she found it a copy of an old will, one that changed everything. The new will had removed her entirely from the inheritance, leaving everything to Alison and Mark. Her hands clenched the paper. This was the final proof, the final betrayal. She wasn't going to let them get away with this. Evelyn returned home and found a photocopy of a new will, one that erased her from the inheritance. It was time to take action. Evelyn paused at the door of her lawyer's office, her hand resting on the doorknob. She knew that what she was about to do wasn't just about seeking justice. It was about reclaiming the dignity that had been stripped away from her. She had spent years sacrificing for others, but now for the first time she was fighting for herself. This was no longer just a battle over money. It was a battle to restore her sense of self-worth. Inside, Lisa Walker sat at her desk, looking up as Evelyn entered. There was a quiet understanding between them, a bond forged in the pursuit of truth. Evelyn took a seat, laying down the files she had brought with her. They were heavy with the weight of all that had happened, the missing money, the secretive transactions, and now the evidence she had carefully gathered. I found more. Evelyn said, her voice steady, but filled with purpose. She handed Lisa a stack of documents, each one marked with red flags. These are records from the past few months, withdrawals I never authorized. And I've also been recording some of the conversations between Alison and Mark. Lisa nodded, flipping through the papers. This is good. We can use this. But we need more. We need to prove that they've been working together to manipulate you. Evelyn's eyes hardened. She wasn't just going to let them get away with it. She had spent too many years in silence, too many years putting others first. This time, things would be different. Later that evening, Evelyn sat at her desk, sorting through more documents. Her fingers moved swiftly over the papers, piecing together the puzzle that had haunted her for months. She found more discrepancies, small, seemingly insignificant transfers from her accounts that had gone unnoticed at first, but now they were undeniable. Each discovery felt like a small victory, but Evelyn knew it wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed something that would expose the full extent of the betrayal. She couldn't afford to miss anything. Evelyn turned on the recorder, a small device she had hidden in her purse. The sound of Alison's voice filled the room, followed by Mark's low, calculated tone. Evelyn's heart pounded as she listened to the conversation. They were discussing more than just finances. They were plotting how to take control of everything she had worked for, how to manipulate her into signing documents she didn't understand. The betrayal stung, but it also fueled her determination. She quickly pressed stop on the recorder and made a note to bring the conversation to Lisa. She wasn't going to let them win. A few days later, Evelyn went through some old family files, hoping to find something that could turn the tide in her favor. It was then that she came across a document that made her stomach churn. It was a copy of a legal document, a deed, a will, something that looked wrong. The signatures seemed off. The dates didn't match up, and there was a clear attempt to forge her name. Evelyn's hands trembled as she examined the document closely. This was it. This was the smoking gun she needed. With a sense of purpose, she made a copy and placed it into the folder with the rest of the evidence. This wasn't just about proving her point. It was about taking back control, about standing up to those who had taken so much from her. As she looked over everything once more, Evelyn muttered to herself, "I won't back down." The words were a promise, a vow she had made to herself. She had everything she needed to win this battle, but there was still so much at stake. Could she really expose her own family, risk everything to bring the truth to light? She didn't know what the outcome would be, but she knew one thing for sure: she would fight, no matter what. "I won't back down," Evelyn whispered, staring at the evidence in her hands. But could she truly win this fight? Evelyn sat still in the courtroom, her heart pounding, but her face steady. The moment had arrived, the moment she would stand up, not just for her assets, but for her dignity, the power that had been taken from her for so long. Today wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming her place in the world, her voice in her own family. The room buzzed with tension. Lisa Walker, her attorney, sat beside her, confident but aware of the stakes. On the other side of the room, Alison and Mark sat together, their expressions cold and defiant. The courtroom felt like a battlefield, and Evelyn knew that this was just the beginning of the fight. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Lisa stood first, laying out the case. Evelyn watched as Lisa presented the evidence documents, recordings, and bank statements. Every piece of proof was a small victory, a step closer to uncovering the truth. The room grew quiet as Lisa methodically explained how Alison and Mark had been manipulating Evelyn using her assets, without her knowledge draining her of the life she had built. Each detail she presented hit like a blow, and Evelyn felt both a sense of relief and anger rise in her chest. She was finally being heard. Alison and Mark remained unmoved. Mark's voice broke the silence, rising with indignation. "This is a lie. All of it," he shouted. "You've twisted everything. We've done nothing wrong." Alison, calmer but no less firm, turned to the judge. "We've been trying to help my mother. She's just being difficult. We're looking out for her best interests." The words stung, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She stood up, her voice clear. "I'm not being difficult. I'm being deceived. I trusted you both with my life, and you've used me. I won't stand by while you take everything from me." There was a shift in the room. The weight of Evelyn's words settled in the silence. For the first time, she felt the power of her voice. Then, just when Evelyn thought she had gained the upper hand, an unexpected figure entered the room, a man she hadn't seen in years. Robert Jenkins, a former business partner of Harold's, her late husband. Evelyn's stomach churned with confusion. What was he doing here? Robert stepped forward and addressed the court. "I've known Evelyn's family for years, and I've witnessed more than I care to admit. I've kept this information to myself for far too long." He pulled out several documents, old business records, signatures and transactions that no one had known about. They exposed a web of lies, proving that Alison and Mark had been involved in shady financial dealings even before Harold's death. Evelyn's eyes widened as Robert spoke, and for the first time she felt a flicker of hope. But the moment was fleeting. As Robert finished his testimony, Lisa leaned over and whispered urgently to Evelyn. "We can't continue helping you. They're preparing to discredit us. They're too strong." Evelyn's heart sank. She had come so far. Could she really lose now, just when she was starting to win? But she refused to let fear overtake her. She had nothing left to lose. She had to keep fighting no matter how hard it got. "I won't back down," Evelyn muttered to herself, her hands tightening around the documents. The courtroom remained still, the future uncertain, but one thing was clear. Evelyn wasn't going to let them take her dignity. Not without a fight. "We can't continue helping you," Lisa said, her voice filled with concern. "They're preparing everything to push you into a corner." Evelyn's resolve wavered, but she knew she couldn't give up now. Evelyn stood in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, looking at her daughter. There was no longer any fear in her eyes. There was only determination. The woman she had once been quiet, patient, always putting others first, was gone. What remained was a woman ready to fight, to reclaim her dignity and her place in the world. Alison stood across from her, her arms crossed tightly, a mixture of anger and disbelief on her face. Mark hovered behind her, his posture rigid, his eyes cold. It was no longer a family meeting. It was a battleground. "You're making a mistake," Mom Alison said sharply, her voice laced with frustration. "This lawsuit, this isn't going to help anyone. It's going to tear this family apart. You're going to lose everything." Evelyn didn't flinch. She had heard this before, countless times, but it had no power over her anymore. She had already lost so much. There was nothing left to fear. "I'm not doing this for money," Evelyn said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm doing this for myself, for my dignity, for the woman I used to be before you and Mark took everything from me." Mark's voice broke through, sharp and defensive. "We've been trying to help you, Evelyn. You don't understand. You're too old to manage everything. We're just trying to take care of you." "No," Evelyn shot back, her eyes hardening. "You've been taking advantage of me, manipulating me, using me. You've made it clear that you want control, not just of my money, but of my life." Alison stepped forward, her tone turning colder. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. We did everything for you. This is how you repay us." Evelyn could feel the weight of her daughter's words, but she stood tall. She had been invisible for too long, letting them trample over her. "Not anymore." "I don't owe you anything," Evelyn replied, her voice unwavering. "And I'm not going to back down." The room was charged with tension as the two women locked eyes. Every word that had been left unsaid for years, all the hurt, all the resentment filled the space between them. It was clear now that nothing would ever be the same. The family Evelyn had once tried so hard to hold together had fractured beyond repair. Mark moved closer, his voice low and threatening. "You think you're going to win? You think you can fight us? You're old, Evelyn. You'll lose. You always do." But Evelyn didn't waver. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had made a promise to herself that she would not let them win no matter what. "I will not give up." Evelyn said her words, sharp and final. "This is my life. You don't get to control it anymore." Alison's face twisted with anger. "We won't let you win." She snapped, her voice filled with venom. "You don't stand a chance against us." Evelyn's gaze remained steady, her heart beating steadily in her chest. She had already made her decision. No matter how hard they pushed, no matter what they said, she wasn't going to be their victim anymore. "Don't ever think of me as a loser," Evelyn said quietly, her voice full of resolve. She turned to Lisa, who had been standing quietly by her side, watching the confrontation unfold. Lisa nodded at her, offering a silent show of support. Evelyn had come a long way, and now, with the truth in her hands, she knew she had the strength to finish what she had started. "We won't let you win." Alison sneered, her voice laced with threat. But Evelyn remained silent, her response clear. "Don't ever think of me as a loser." Each day, Evelyn felt the resistance from her family growing stronger, but her resolve became unshakable. The battle wasn't just for her money or assets. It was for her life, her right to exist as more than just a figure in the background of her own family. Alison and Mark intensified their attempts to break her spirit. They tried to pull in relatives, pressure her from all sides, but Evelyn refused to give in. The more they pushed, the more she stood firm. The legal fight was taking a toll, but Evelyn knew she had come too far to turn back now. The courtroom had become a battleground, and with each passing day, the tension was rising. Lisa Walker, her trusted attorney, had been her anchor through it all, guiding her and helping her piece together the case. With Lisa's support, Evelyn found herself becoming more determined, more capable than she'd ever thought possible. At home, the situation was only getting worse. The house that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a place of war, the once warm rooms now echoing with silence. The laughter that used to fill these walls had been replaced with a cold, oppressive atmosphere. Yet in the quiet, Evelyn found a strange sense of strength. Margaret Langley, her longtime neighbour, had become an unexpected ally, offering her support and even providing important information that bolstered Evelyn's case. Margaret's presence was a reminder that Evelyn wasn't alone in this fight. She wasn't the only one who saw through the lies. One night, Evelyn's phone rang. The voice on the other end was one she hadn't expected. It was a relative, someone who had been in contact with Alison and Mark, and someone who had knowledge of their plans. "I know what's happening," the voice said. "Alison and Mark are trying to push you out completely. They don't want just your money. They want to erase you from everything." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She had feared this, but hearing it confirmed made the pain even sharper. The betrayal was deeper than she'd realized. They weren't just taking her possessions. They were trying to erase her from her own life, But with the information this relative provided, Evelyn knew she couldn't back down. She had proof, now proof, that her family wasn't just after her wealth, but after her very existence. The next day, she shared the new information with Lisa. "This is the leverage we need," Lisa said, her voice steady. "We can use this to expose them. We can turn the tide." But even with this new knowledge, Evelyn's family didn't relent. They tried harder to manipulate her, to make her feel guilty, to make her believe she was the one in the wrong. The pressure was immense, but Evelyn refused to bend. She had been silenced for too long, and now for the first time she was standing up for herself. As the legal battle continued, Evelyn's strength grew. She was no longer the woman who had quietly accepted everything. She had found her voice, and she wasn't going to lose it. One evening, as she reviewed the documents she had gathered, Lisa called with urgent news. "They have a new plan," Lisa said, her voice tense. "But we won't let them win. We have the upper hand now. We'll fight back." Evelyn felt a surge of determination. They had tried to break her, but she was stronger than they realized. She had the truth on her side, and she would not stop until she had won. "They have a new plan," Lisa said, her voice sharp. "But we won't let them win." When the judge announced the preliminary ruling, Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. The courtroom was quiet, filled with anticipation. The decision was significant, but it was not the final victory she had hoped for. The judge's voice echoed in the room, stating that the matter of asset ownership would be revisited and that the case was far from over. Evelyn had expected more, but she understood something crucial in that moment. This was only the beginning of a much larger fight. Evelyn sat back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the news. The ruling wasn't a win, not in the way she had imagined, but it wasn't a defeat either. The legal battle was still alive, and with this decision, she had gained more time, more opportunity to fight for what was rightfully hers. It was a small step, but a significant one. Her determination didn't waver. She was prepared for what came next. As she left the courthouse with Lisa by her side, Evelyn couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty settle over her. She had hoped for a clear, decisive victory, but the ruling had left many questions unanswered. Her family, though they had lost some ground, wasn't giving up easily. Alison and Mark were still determined to take control, and Evelyn knew that the road ahead would be filled with even more challenges. Yet despite the weight of the situation, she found herself standing tall, more resolute than ever. Back at home, Evelyn faced a different kind of tension. The house, once filled with warmth, now seemed hollow and distant. Alison and Mark had been relentless, trying to wear her down, trying to make her feel like she was the one in the wrong. But Evelyn was no longer that woman. She had fought for years to keep her family together, to protect them. Now it was time for her to protect herself. As Evelyn sat in her living room reviewing the case and reflecting on the day's events, a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Margaret Langley standing on her porch, holding a manila envelope. "I have something for you," Margaret said, her voice calm but urgent. Evelyn took the envelope from her, her heart racing as she opened it. Inside was a statement from a surprise witness, a neighbour who had overheard a conversation between Mark and a family lawyer, confirming that they had been planning to manipulate Evelyn into signing over her assets. The evidence was shocking, and Evelyn knew it could change the course of the trial. This could be the turning point, Evelyn whispered, her mind racing with the possibilities. But she also knew the path ahead would not be easy. The family would fight back, and the legal battles were far from over. Yet for the first time, Evelyn felt a surge of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The next day in court, the judge addressed the new evidence presented. "We still have time to revisit the case. He said, his tone measured. "But I warn you, the road ahead will be difficult. There's much more to this than anyone anticipated." Evelyn's heart sank as she listened to the judge, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't backing down. This battle wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming what had been taken from her, about restoring the respect and dignity that had been stripped away. No matter how long it took, she would fight for her place in her own family. "We still have time to revisit the case," the judge said, but Evelyn knew without a doubt that she would never give up. Evelyn stood tall, the weight of the evidence in her hands, pressing against her palm. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She faced her family, her daughter Alison and son-in-law Mark, knowing that this time there was no room for doubt, no way to back down. With each piece of proof she held, she felt more certain that her fight was justified. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming her dignity, the very essence of who she was in her own family. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Evelyn stepped forward, flanked by her lawyer Lisa Walker. The air was thick, each word spoken felt heavy, each movement deliberate. She could feel the eyes of the judge, her family, and even the court clerk focused on her. She had come so far, and today she would face the culmination of it all. As Evelyn took the stand, she presented the evidence. The documents, the recordings, everything she had painstakingly collected, each one stronger than the last. Her voice was steady as she explained how her family had manipulated her, used her, and tried to strip her of everything. With each word, the weight of her truth grew heavier, more undeniable. There was no escaping it now. Alison and Mark, however, were not ready to let go of control so easily. They countered with their usual deflection, trying to twist the narrative, claiming that Evelyn had misunderstood or that the evidence was inconclusive. But Evelyn wasn't swayed. She knew what was at stake. "I've seen how you've taken from me, manipulated me," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "I'm not asking for your understanding. I'm demanding justice." The judge nodded, processing the information. The tension in the courtroom mounted as the final arguments were made. This was the moment when everything would either fall into place or slip away. Just as the arguments seemed to reach their peak, something unexpected happened. One of the witnesses, a distant relative, entered the courtroom with an envelope in hand. She was nervous but resolute as she approached the stand. She spoke quietly, but clearly, presenting a document that none of them had seen before, an old will that had been hidden away. It was a copy of the original document, one that showed that Harold Evelyn's late husband had made decisions about his estate that had never been honoured by Alison and Mark. The courtroom fell silent as the implications of the document sank in. This was it, the piece of the puzzle Evelyn had been missing. The will, long thought to be lost, was the key to everything. It was the final nail in the coffin for Alison and Mark's plan to take control. Evelyn's heart raced, but there was no turning back now. As the judge reviewed the new evidence, Mark's face turned ashen. "We've lost," he muttered under his breath, his voice full of disbelief. Evelyn could feel the weight of his words, but they didn't bring the satisfaction she had expected. This battle had cost her so much. But in this moment, she felt a sense of triumph, a quiet victory. She had fought for her life, for her identity, and for the truth to be heard. It wasn't just about the estate anymore. It was about reclaiming what she had lost: her power, her place, and her voice. "We've lost," Mark whispered, and Evelyn knew she had come close to winning. But was it enough? Would her family truly let go of everything they had tried to take? The courtroom had fallen silent, and with the judge's final decision, Evelyn knew the battle wasn't over. It wasn't the triumphant victory she had once imagined, but it was a victory nonetheless. As she stood there, her heart heavy with everything that had transpired, Evelyn realized that the true triumph wasn't about reclaiming her wealth or assets, it was about reclaiming herself. The long road had taken a toll on her physically, mentally, emotionally, but Evelyn had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. The fight had altered her not just in how she viewed her family or her financial situation, but in how she viewed herself. She was no longer the woman who had quietly endured. The courage, the strength she had unearthed during this battle had redefined her. At home, everything felt quieter than it had been in months. The tension that had once consumed the walls of the house seemed to dissipate. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever would be after everything that had happened, but the silence now felt different. It was the kind of quiet that allowed space for reflection, for healing. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, gazing out the window. The familiar view was unchanged, but she was no longer the same woman who had once watched through that very window, feeling powerless. The family she had fought to hold together had fractured beyond repair, but Evelyn was no longer defined by that. Her phone rang, breaking her thoughts. Margaret's name flashed across the screen, and Evelyn answered with a weary smile. "Evelyn? I just wanted to check in." Margaret's voice was soft, comforting. "How are you holding up?" Evelyn leaned back, letting out a long sigh. "It's been a lot," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "But I'm okay. I'm starting to understand that this fight was never just about money. It was about my life, my right to live it as I choose." Margaret paused, a knowing silence on the other end of the line. "You've done something most people would never have the strength to do, Evelyn. And no matter what happens next, I want you to remember that." Evelyn nodded, though Margaret couldn't see her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I think I'm starting to realize that too." After the call, Evelyn sat for a long time, lost in thought. The weight of the past months settled on her shoulders, but for the first time it didn't feel like a burden. She hadn't won everything she had hoped for, but she had won the most important thing of all, herself. The truth had been revealed, and though it hadn't given her everything, it had given her freedom. Evelyn walked to her desk and opened the drawer where she kept her journal. She hadn't written in it in years, but now, with a steady hand, she began to write. She wrote about the fight, the loss, and the lessons learned. She wrote about how she had survived it all. "I've lost a lot," she wrote, "but I'm not a loser. I found myself again." Evelyn paused and looked at the words, letting them sink in. She had been fighting for so long, fighting for her family, for her home, for her own worth. But now, for the first time, she realized she didn't need to fight anymore. The battle had taught her that she could stand on her own. She didn't need anyone's approval to define her value. She had always had it within her. She looked up from the page, gazing out at the house. Her house. She had fought for it, and in doing so had found a new sense of peace. "I've lost a lot," Evelyn whispered to herself, looking at the house she had fought for. "But I'm not a loser." Evelyn stood in the middle of her garden, feeling the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the flowers she had planted, each one a symbol of her new beginning. There were no more ties to the past, no more obligations to anyone but herself. She had reached a point where nothing could hold her back. She was free. For months, Evelyn had been fighting to regain control of her life, but now she realized that the battle wasn't about what she had lost. It was about what she had gained the strength to move forward, to stand on her own, to build a life that was hers, and hers alone. No longer did she need to be the caretaker, the silent figure in the background. She had become her own person again. The phone rang, breaking the stillness of the moment. It was Lisa Walker, her lawyer, calling with updates on the final legal decisions. Evelyn didn't need to hear the details. She had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to return to the life she once had. The ties to Alison and Mark were severed not out of hatred, but out of a deep, quiet understanding that the time had come to let go. "I'm done with that part of my life," Evelyn said to Lisa, her voice calm but resolute. "I don't need their approval anymore. I don't need anything from them." Lisa was quiet for a moment before responding. "You've come a long way, Evelyn. I'm proud of you. But remember, this is about you now. You've reclaimed your dignity." Evelyn hung up the phone, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She had made the decision to move forward, to leave behind the toxic relationships that had defined her for so long. She had become someone new, someone who valued her own worth. The garden around her was alive with colour, the flowers she had nurtured flourishing under her care. Evelyn had always loved this space, but now it represented so much more. It was a reflection of her own growth. Each flower was a reminder of the battles she had fought and the victories she had won, not just in the courtroom, but in her heart. She knelt down to water the plants, her movements slow and deliberate. As she did, her mind drifted to the years she had spent trying to please everyone else, neglecting her own needs. But that was in the past now. The life she had built was hers to live. The love she had once poured into her family, the sacrifices she had made, had been important. But they had also drained her. Now, she was learning how to fill her own cup. Evelyn stood up, her hands covered in soil, and looked out at the garden. She smiled. This was her place of peace, her sanctuary. It was here that she realized she was no longer the woman she had been, lost, overlooked, and invisible. She was someone new, someone who had rediscovered her own voice. Looking out at the horizon, Evelyn realized that for the first time in her life, she felt completely free. No more ties to the past, no more weight on her shoulders. She was free to be herself, free to live her life on her own terms. "I will never go back to how things were," Evelyn whispered to herself, standing in her garden. "This is my life now," and this time she didn't feel alone anymore. As the courtroom settled into silence, Evelyn felt the weight of the final verdict press against her. The judge's voice echoed in the room, announcing the decision. It wasn't the clear victory she had hoped for, but it wasn't a defeat either. The truth had been laid bare for all to see, and though her family had not been fully brought to justice, the respect she had fought for her dignity was now undeniable. The judge's ruling had been a small victory, a step in the right direction, but Evelyn knew that this battle was never just about assets. It had always been about regaining control of her life, about standing up for herself, and about rebuilding her worth piece by piece. As she left the courtroom, the exhaustion in her body was matched only by the quiet strength she now carried. She wasn't done fighting, but for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope. At home, the atmosphere was different. The silence that had once felt oppressive now seemed more like a welcome peace. The house, once filled with tension, now felt like a place she could breathe again. There was no going back to what it had been, but perhaps that was for the best. Everything had changed, perhaps not in the way she had expected, but in a way that she now understood was necessary for her to move forward. As Evelyn sat in the living room, the weight of the trial and its outcome still pressing down on her, she glanced at the small pile of mail on the coffee table. One envelope caught her eye. It was from Margaret Langley, her old neighbour, the one person who had supported her when the rest of her family had turned their back. Evelyn opened the letter slowly, her fingers trembling slightly as she read the words. "Evelyn," the letter began, "I know the trial hasn't gone the way you hoped, but I want you to know you are not alone. You've fought for what's right. and that is a victory in itself. There are people who see you, who understand, and who stand with you. Don't ever doubt that. Evelyn placed the letter down and sat back, her mind swirling. Margaret's words were more than just comfort. They were a reminder that her fight had never been for nothing. The community, though quiet, had watched and supported her. She wasn't just fighting against her family. She was fighting for a life where she was respected, where her voice mattered, where her dignity wasn't up for debate. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, not from defeat, but from the overwhelming realization that she had never truly been alone. She had friends, people who believed in her, and that was worth more than anything her family had taken from her. As she looked out of the window, Evelyn felt a sense of clarity. The verdict, the money, the possessions, they no longer held the same weight. What mattered now was that she had fought for herself and had won the most important thing of all, her autonomy, her right to live on her terms. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Evelyn felt prepared to face it. "We won't stop here," Evelyn whispered to herself, staring at the letter in her hands, her heart full of quiet determination. The future was hers to shape. As Evelyn walked out of the courtroom, she could feel the weight of the past few months lifting from her shoulders. The decision wasn't what she had hoped for. There was no sweeping victory, no final justice. But the relief was palpable. She had fought for her dignity, and though the battle hadn't been won in full, she had emerged with something far more valuable: recognition. The court had acknowledged her right to her property, her legacy, and most importantly, her humanity. Evelyn paused on the steps of the courthouse, taking a deep breath of fresh air. It was a small victory, but one that would change the course of her life. The tension that had been a constant in her chest for so long now felt lighter, yet she knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. The family she had fought so hard to protect had been broken by her actions, and she could no longer return to the life she had known. At home, Evelyn sat in her favourite chair, staring out the window into the garden. The house felt quiet, a place where peace could finally settle. But even in the silence, there was a hum of something deeper, a sense of purpose, of strength that had taken root within her. The years of self-sacrifice, the quiet suffering, and the years of silencing her own needs had led to this moment. She had been afraid for so long, afraid to speak out, afraid to lose the family she had spent so much of her life trying to hold together. But now, with the court's decision behind her, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. This was her life now. As Evelyn leaned back in her chair, she thought about the fight. The paperwork, the long hours with Lisa, the anxiety, the tears, it had all led her to this moment of clarity. The law had spoken, but it was the personal victory that mattered most. She had reclaimed her dignity, and that would never be taken from her again. The family that once looked down on her, the ones who thought they could control her, had been forced to recognize her strength. She was no longer invisible. The years of being overlooked, dismissed, and undermined had come to an end. Evelyn wasn't the same woman she had been before. She had found her voice, her purpose, and now, for the first time, she could sit in her own home and simply be. Margaret's words echoed in her mind, her friend's encouragement, as she had stood by Evelyn throughout it all. "You're not alone," Margaret had said. And Evelyn realized more than ever that she wasn't. She had built something far stronger than a legal victory. She had built herself. Evelyn looked out at the garden, where the flowers were beginning to bloom their vibrant colours, a reminder of the life she was now reclaiming. She didn't need to win it all. The fight for her dignity had been more than enough. "I don't need to win it all," Evelyn whispered to herself as she looked out at the blooming garden I've won in my heart. Evelyn's hand shook as she reached for the phone. She knew who it was before she even looked at the screen. The caller ID flashed Alison's name, and for a moment, Evelyn hesitated. She had been avoiding this conversation for so long, but she knew it was inevitable. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment when she would finally put an end to the toxic relationship that had drained her for years. With a deep breath, Evelyn answered. "Hello, Alison." The voice on the other end was familiar, yet distant. "Mom." Alison's tone was sharp, but there was a sense of desperation behind it. "I need your help. Things are really bad here. The bills are piling up and I don't know what to do. Can you lend me some money?" Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of her daughter's words sinking in. She had heard this before. She had given, and it had never been enough. The emotional and financial strain of their relationship had taken its toll on her, and Evelyn knew that helping again would only continue the cycle. "I can't," Evelyn replied softly but firmly. "I won't help you any more, Alison. I've been there for you, but I can't keep doing this. I'm done." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Alison spoke again, her voice was full of anger. "You're really going to leave me like this, after everything I've done for you after all these years?" Evelyn felt a pang in her chest, but she didn't falter. "I've given you everything I could, Alison. But it's never been enough, has it? You've taken from me for so long, and I've allowed it. But no more. I've let you control my life for too long, and I won't do it anymore." Alison's voice trembled with frustration and fury. "You'll regret this, Mom. You'll see." Evelyn's heart was heavy, but there was a quiet strength in her that had grown over the past months. "No, I won't. I'm doing what's best for me now, and for you too. You need to figure this out on your own." The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn could feel her daughter's anger radiating through the phone, but she didn't back down. This was her moment of clarity. She had finally found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone silence her again. "I have to go, Alison," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "This is the end of this chapter for me, and for you too." With that, she ended the call. The silence in her home felt different now, not oppressive, but freeing. Evelyn sat down in her favourite chair, the one by the window where she had spent so many hours in reflection. She looked out at the garden. She had nurtured the flowers in full bloom, each one a symbol of the life she was building for herself. Evelyn knew that the path ahead would be lonely at times, but she also knew that this was the only way for her to truly heal. The decision to let go of her daughter, to stop enabling the toxic dynamic that had defined their relationship for so long, wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel weak. She felt strong, liberated. "You'll regret this, Mom." Alison's voice echoed in her mind, filled with anger. Evelyn sat back, her resolve unwavering. "I won't regret it," she whispered softly to herself. Evelyn stood at the edge of the garden, her hands lightly brushing the petals of the flowers she had nurtured for months. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over the colourful blooms, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn felt a deep sense of peace. She had built this garden, this sanctuary, with her own hands, and in doing so, she had rebuilt herself. She looked around at the quiet space she had created, the one that had become her refuge. The house, once filled with tension and sorrow, now felt like a home, her home. Evelyn had spent years defining herself by what others expected, by the roles others wanted her to play. But now, as she gazed at the flowers, she realized that she was no longer bound by anyone's expectations. She was free. Her journey had been long, full of heartache and struggle, but in the end, It had brought her to this moment of quiet joy. The court's decision, her estranged relationship with her family, it all seemed far away now. The material things that she had once fought so hard to protect felt insignificant. The true victory was the freedom she had found within herself. She had made new friends, people who saw her for who she truly was not, for what she could give. Her art classes had opened a new door, and for the first time in years, she had rediscovered her passion. She was no longer just a mother, a caregiver, or a woman defined by others' needs. She was Evelyn, a woman of her own making. One evening, Evelyn stood before a small crowd at the local art gallery. Her paintings, simple, heartfelt pieces of nature, and quiet moments hung on the walls, and she couldn't help but feel proud. The fact that her work was being displayed, that she had taken the step to share a part of herself with the world, felt like a triumph. It wasn't about success or recognition. It was about reclaiming a part of herself she had forgotten existed. Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride and peace as she stood there surrounded by the soft hum of quiet conversation and the gentle hum of music playing in the background. This was her moment. This was her life. As the evening wore on, Evelyn wandered through the gallery, lost in her own thoughts. She passed a mirror on the wall and paused. For a moment, she looked at her reflection. Not the reflection of the woman she had been, but of the woman she had become. She smiled softly. The battle had been long, but she had emerged stronger, more whole than ever before. Looking back at the paintings, Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought her here. The court case, the loss, the tears, they were all a part of the past now. She had fought for herself and had won the greatest prize of all, the ability to live freely on her own terms. Evelyn walked to the window of the gallery, looking out at the night sky. The stars twinkled brightly, as if they were echoing the sense of hope she felt in her heart. "I'm not the person I used to be," Evelyn whispered to herself, a sense of finality in her words. "This is my new life, and I'm finally living it. I'm not the person I used to be," Evelyn whispered as she looked at her final painting, knowing that this was the life she had always been meant to live. Evelyn had fought for justice, but in the end, it wasn't the legal victory that mattered most. It was the restoration of her dignity. The years of sacrifice, silence, and suffering had finally given way to a life she could own free from the chains of betrayal. She learned that justice may come late, but when it does, it rings louder than any courtroom verdict. Evelyn had broken free from a lifetime of manipulation, and in doing so, she reclaimed not just her home, but her soul. Sometimes it only takes one brave choice to change everything. What do you think of Evelyn's journey? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Heavy Stories for more gripping tales of resilience and justice.